Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to completely unpack the hidden mechanics of a massive, almost invisible ecosystem. We are talking about a marketplace where literally 1 out of every 5 federal dollars lives. It's where your tax dollars buy absolutely everything, from cutting-edge fighter jets to the hand soap sitting in the bathroom of a federal building in Cleveland. The scale here is staggering, the rules are famously complex, and honestly, almost nobody outside of the industry actually understands how the plumbing works. But today, we're going to fix that.
To decode this giant labyrinth, we're just going to follow the money. We'll start with the $793 billion rulebook, look at what it takes to actually win that money, ask who eats the risk, explore how the marketplace is engineered, and finally, get into the wild world of audits, scandals, and reform.
All right, Section 1, the $793 billion rulebook. The very first thing we need to recognize is that federal contracting isn't actually a single market at all. It's more like a single sprawling rulebook that gets layered over hundreds of different federal agencies. And that brings us to the financial stakes. Brace yourself for this number. According to the Government Accountability Office, in fiscal year 2025, the federal government obligated approximately $793 billion on contracts. Just to put that into perspective for a second, that is more money than the entire economy of Switzerland. And what exactly are they buying with all that cash? Well, everything. The top defense product was fixed-wing aircraft, coming in at nearly $42 billion. Meanwhile, the top civilian product was $18 billion spent on drugs and biologicals. So whether we're talking about a single fighter jet program that costs more than the GDP of most nations, or just routine lawn maintenance at a local federal courthouse, it all pulls from this one massive pool of capital.
Now, you might be thinking what most people think, that government contracts are all hoovered up by a tiny cabal of mega defense giants. But that's actually a huge illusion. Yes, the top 10 mega contractors absolutely brought in a huge chunk, about 29% of the total in 2025, but look at the rest. Well over $500 billion, 71% of the entire pie, is spread out across a vast underbrush of over 100,000 small and mid-sized companies. It is a wildly decentralized ecosystem.
But here's the catch. Every single one of those 100,000 companies has to operate under the exact same rulebook, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR. Section 1.12 lays out the vision for this whole system, and it perfectly captures what we can call the master tension of federal contracting. The government is demanding 3 things simultaneously: best value, fast delivery, and absolute integrity and public trust. That agonizing balancing act between value, speed, and integrity, keep that in mind because it explains almost every bizarre quirk of the system we're about to look at.
Moving on to Section 2, winning the government's money. Let's talk about the totally grueling path from needing something to actually awarding a contract. In your private life, if you need a new computer, you probably spend a Friday afternoon comparing options on Google. You click buy, and you're done. But spending taxpayer money under the FAR? That timeline is closer to 18 months.
Here is the grueling reality of how an agency decides to buy something. First, they have to develop a program requirement. This means documenting exactly what they need and legally proving they have the appropriated funds to pay for it. Next comes acquisition planning, deciding exactly how they're going to buy it. Then, market research, literally sending out feelers to see if companies are even capable of doing the work. Only after months of all this behind-the-scenes prep does it finally reach the solicitations phase, where requests for proposals are publicly posted. And bidding on these isn't easy. Companies have to submit proposals that are literally hundreds of pages long, following insanely strict formatting rules. We're talking about a process where missing a submission deadline by literally 1 minute means instant disqualification. No exceptions.
So, who actually has the power to pull the trigger on all of this? Get this, it's not who you'd think. This brings us to a really fascinating reality of the federal bureaucracy, the contracting officer, often called a CO or KO. They are the only federal employees legally authorized to bind the United States government to a contract. A 4-star general, they cannot legally sign a contract for a new jet, but a GS-13 contracting officer, wielding their authority through a specialized legal document called a warrant rather than military rank, can single-handedly obligate $400 million. The ultimate signature authority lives purely in that warrant.
Let's jump into Section 3, who eats the risk? This is the fundamental financial dynamic of contract types. When the government and a contractor sign a deal, they aren't just haggling over a price tag.
They are making a massive decision about what happens when things inevitably go sideways. Who actually carries the financial risk? Stripping away all the government jargon, let's look at a fixed-price contract. The government says, hey, build us a warehouse for $4 million. If the price of steel spikes and it ends up costing $5 million, the contractor eats that loss completely. But if they manage to do it for $3 million, they get to keep the profit. It's a great system for predictable commodities. Now, contrast that with cost reimbursement, commonly known as cost plus. Here, the contractor gets paid for all allowable costs, plus a guaranteed fee. So the government eats the risk. Why on earth would they do this? Well, because you can't realistically ask a company to give a fixed price on inventing something completely unprecedented, like a novel hypersonic missile or a fusion reactor. Nobody knows what that will cost. But as you can probably guess, this creates a massive systemic moral hazard, because the contractor has way less incentive to keep costs down.
And because the government doesn't want to go through that painful multi-month solicitation process for every single purchase, they use a few other clever instruments. Time and materials is used when labor hours are totally unpredictable. Then you have IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Think of these as massive umbrella contracts where the government basically says, we'll buy up to a certain maximum amount of stuff over the next 10 years and we'll just order it as we need it. It's incredibly efficient, which is why this structure has absolutely exploded in popularity, handling a whopping $72.4 billion in 2025 alone.
Which naturally brings us to Section 4, Engineering the Marketplace. We need to talk about how this procurement system is used for social and industrial policy. Because this $793 billion ecosystem, it is not simply a neutral, lowest bidder wins marketplace. Not at all. It is a highly engineered tool.
Washington intentionally engineers the market by carving out billions of dollars exclusively for specific groups. These are known as set-asides. You have the 8A program for socially and economically disadvantaged businesses, which even allows for massive sole-source contracts up to $7 million without any competition. There are hub zone programs targeting economically distressed geographic areas, plus there are specific 3% targets for women-owned and service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. The explicit goal here is pretty clear. Push capital toward underrepresented groups, build up supply chain resilience, and generate genuine economic mobility. It's essentially designed to prevent 5 massive companies from just owning the entire market.
However, as with any highly engineered system, there is a serious tension here. It is an open secret in the industry that this system can be gamed through what are called pass-through arrangements. This is where a small, qualifying business wins a lucrative set-aside contract, takes a small percentage fee off the top, and then essentially subcontracts all the actual work right back to a giant corporation. Highlighting this exact tension, in November 2025, the Treasury Department audited roughly $9 billion in preference-based contracts, specifically over fraud concerns. Proponents of the audit framed it as a necessary step to protect taxpayer dollars from blatant abuse, while critics framed it as a politically motivated attempt to dismantle equity initiatives. Impartially speaking, both dynamics, the genuine economic mobility and the loophole exploitation, exist simultaneously in this ecosystem.
And that transitions us perfectly into our final chapter, Section 5, Audits, Scandals, and Reform. Let's look at what happens after the award is signed. Most people assume that winning the contract is the finish line, but in reality, winning the award is merely the starting line for a heavily audited, decade-long marathon.
The money doesn't just magically arrive in a Brinks truck the next day. The post-award reality means money flows slowly, in metered slices, and the contractor is immediately bound by highly asymmetric rules. Take FAR Part 52's Termination for Convenience Clause. This literally gives the government the legal right to cancel the contract at any time, for any reason, with absolutely zero lost future profits paid to the company. Imagine signing a business deal like that. Furthermore, every single dollar on a cost-plus contract is subject to intense defense contract audit agency. As programs inevitably evolve, thousands of bilateral modifications can drastically alter the original price tag, which then leads to massive, years-long administrative backlogs just to formally close out a contract.
Now, when you mix intense information asymmetry with dense bureaucracy and weak oversight, you get a very predictable cycle of scandals. Back in 1985, we had the infamous $640 plastic toilet seat cover for the C-5 transport plane. A later Senate investigation actually found the cost had ballooned to over $1,800. In 1988, Operation Ill Wind uncovered massive, widespread bribery schemes. Fast forward to the 2000s, and we get the Fat Leonard scandal, where a contractor was bribing Navy officials with cash and cigars to steer ships to specific ports.
This is a guy who literally cut off his ankle monitor to escape house arrest in 2022. And it's this exact continuous cycle of scandal that leads directly to modern reform efforts, like the sweeping 2025 Executive Order 14,275, a FAR overhaul intended to slash all these regulations and restore plain language to the whole process.
To truly grasp the scale of these pathologies, brace yourself for this final estimate. The Department of Defense Inspector General once conservatively estimated that 5% of federal contracting is lost to outright fraud annually. On a $793 billion budget, 5% is roughly $40 billion a year. Let that sink in. And remember, that is just the outright literal fraud. That doesn't even count the everyday basic inefficiencies.
So what's the big takeaway here? The rules of this marketplace are a 250-year-old inheritance of trying to spend public money under the intense glare of public scrutiny. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Will the revolutionary 2025 FAR overhaul actually resolve that master tension between value, speed, and integrity? Or, as history strongly suggests, will it simply generate an entirely new species of pathology for the next decade? It's a multi-billion-dollar question about your tax money, and it's one we should absolutely all be paying close attention to. Thank you for learning with me today, and keep your curiosity focused.